So I think it all ties into the reform of the Security Council, the issue of international justice also. Senegal was the first country to sign the Rome Statute on the International Criminal Court. Why? Well, precisely because even though we might be from Africa, we might be poor, we might be imperfect in our governance, we feel that genocide should be sanctioned. So I promote, and I am an advocate of the current system because there are some good things in it, but we have to improve it. We can improve it, but we can only improve it if we all sit together around a common table and discuss these issues. Now, in the UN the other day, I was delighted when the president of Santo Domingo said, after giving a speech on the global crisis, he said, and he turned us to all of us in the north and the south, that we had to think about these things, because it's not only in the north that you can find brains and intelligence and initiative. So we have to all work together to try and find solutions. So I think that if we want to change the world, we have to take it progressively, over time, step by step, in peace and not in conflict, and through an exchange of ideas, as we are doing this morning. Now, I won't go on much longer, but let me just say, by way of conclusion, that we shouldn't feel that the people in the north, locked up in their offices, can solve the global problems. We have to involve Africa. It's a great continent with 800 million inhabitants, and soon we'll have 1 billion, 1.5 billion people. A continent that is already a market, that is full of resources. We have to take this continent into account and to take its concerns and needs into account. Now, seeing we want to step back and think about these things, we have to remember that civilizations and science and development started on the shores of the Mediterranean, and then it crossed the Mediterranean, went up north, and these trends of development then crossed the Atlantic into the United States, because it was a new territory, virgin territory, so to speak, unburdened by history. The Americas are now at the heart of global development, but they seem to be turning round and round in circles. Most of the American investments are made in the United States. Now, I'll just remind you that what Carnot, the physicist, said. He said that a system cannot go on forever if there are no ties with the outside world. So it made sense that the United States would collapse in that way. So what's the output? What's the destination for development? It's Africa. Now, I come from the south, of course, so we probably will have something of an impact of the crisis in Senegal, but we have grain, for instance, our crop was very good. Now, maybe you can reform the banks, you can steal money from the taxpayers, as is happening in the US or in Europe, and support the banks so that they can go on working. Of course, yes, you can do that. But in my view, the real solution is to invest all that cash that is causing inflation and instability in Africa. And this will enable us to establish stability in the long run.
Monsieur le Président, en ouverture, vous mettez le débat à son plus haut niveau, puisque Yes, Mr. President, indeed, you have taken this discussion up to the highest level. You talked about the reforming the monetary system, the UN Security Council, so many different topics which are at a supranational level, which goes beyond the powers and controls of individual states alone. And indeed, you have raised some very topical issues which are of paramount importance to the 21st century. You said, well, the world is functioning as a network. Thierry de Montbrial talked about how history is speeding up now. Now, how can we reconcile the needs of different cultures that are radically different, economic cultures, that of the United States, which is a deficit-based culture moving from one bubble to the other. That's how the US economy works. Mr. Trichet will be with us this afternoon and talk about another economic culture, which is a kind of rigidity aimed at harnessing inflation, which is a radically different approach altogether. So how can we work as a multi-connected network if we are not talking about the same thing, if our economic solutions are not the same? What you're describing here is indeed the reality of how the world works today. In other words, how can we create a certain level of uniformity despite conflict of interests. But conflict of interests can help us to look for relative solutions. Now, look at the colonial times. There was constant conflict. The northern countries colonized Africa. But today, we have made so much progress that I'm sitting here next to you and talking about the future of the world, because there has been dialogue, there has been progress. So there is contradiction, no doubt, in the world today, but we can always find solutions. We can bring the peoples of the world together through dialogue. And dialogue and discussions, just like the one we're having today. Because otherwise we'll all be very pessimistic, because otherwise, no matter what the problem, political or economic, I can say, oh well, in any case, my masters at home are starving, so what's the point in me going to Evian and talking about the world banking crisis? It defeats the purpose. No. So I believe that there has to be several levels of dialogue, and the discussion is important, not a superimposition of monopolies. Dialogue, discussion under the tree in Africa leads to certain decisions. Otherwise, one person is going to make a speech, the other is going to read an article, and that will be it, and we won't move any further. If you want this forum to be a full-fledged dialogue, as I said to Mr. de Montbrial, we have to reach a consensus. We have to make some recommendations so that we can say that the Evian Forum gave rise to certain decisions and solutions. Now, of course, in order to have such dialogue, you have to be tolerant and you have to have a liberal culture. And when I say liberal, I really mean tolerance. You mean listening to the other person's point of view. Absolutely. We have to listen to each other mutually, without any preconceived notions. Because